In a sleepy corner of Savannah, a 3-year-old girl with a trembling voice pointed her tiny finger in a courtroom, and what she whispered next would ignite a firestorm of truth that no one saw coming. Her words unmasked the darkest secrets of power and corruption, shaking an entire community to its core. Stay with us as we unravel the story that proves one small voice can bring down giants. Dear viewer, what you are about to witness is not just a story, it is a powerful testament to the quiet power and pursuit of justice in places most people ignore. If this is your first time here, I warmly invite you to share where you are watching in the comments below. And if stories like this move you, challenge you, or make you think, consider subscribing and clicking the bell icon. We share voices that deserve to be heard every day. Thank you for being here. Now, let's get into the story. The streets of Savannah, Georgia, shimmered under a pallid twilight shadows, slipping between the grand live oaks, draped in Spanish moss. It was a world caught between charm and decay. The historic mansions on one side of town, standing in stark contrast to the battered tenements just across the invisible lines that divided the city's heartbeat. It was in these quiet divides, beneath the surface of cobblestones and jazz, that unspoken truths festered. On the edge of Savannah's historic district, where the lights of the tourist quarters dimmed into working-class neighborhoods, stood a small brick duplex. Inside, Clara Thompson was lacing up worn sneakers, while her granddaughter Ellie clutched the hem of her uniform, her tiny voice tremulous. "Grandma, why do you have to work so late?" Clara hesitated. At 62, her bones ached, her knuckles swollen from years of scrubbing the marble floors of the Chatham County Courthouse. She had always managed to shield Ellie from the harsher realities of their world. But tonight, the babysitter was sick, and missing her shift was not an option. "Just for a few hours. Baby," she murmured, smoothing Ellie's curls. "We'll bring your coloring books. You can stay in my closet at work nice and quiet. No one will even know you're there." Ellie nodded solemnly, her small hand slipping into her grandmother's as they stepped into the humid night. The courthouse loomed over them like a cathedral of justice and secrets, its white columns stark against the indigo sky. It was a building Clara knew intimately, every polished floorboard, every dim corridor, but tonight her footsteps felt heavier, her unease sharper. She had always believed that if she kept her head down, did her work, she and Ellie would be safe. But safety, she was beginning to understand, was not something guaranteed to people like them. They entered through the side entrance, the hum of fluorescent lights buzzing overhead. Clara found an empty janitor's closet, tucked Ellie inside with her coloring books and a small flashlight. "Stay here, sweetie. Be quiet as a mouse." "I'll check on you soon," she whispered. Ellie's wide eyes shimmered in the dim light, but she nodded, her tiny frame barely visible among mops and cleaning supplies. Clara closed the door with a soft click and exhaled, steeling herself for another night of invisible labor. But unbeknownst to her, curiosity was already tugging at Ellie's small frame, pulling her from the safety of the closet. It began with the faint echo of voices down the marble hall, a low, harsh whisper that didn't sound like the usual courthouse murmur. Ellie's feet padded silently along the corridor, her stuffed rabbit clutched tightly in her arms. The heavy oak door was ajar, just enough for her to peek inside. What she saw stole her breath. A man in a crisp suit, with a sharp silver tie, District Attorney Gordon Reed, towered over a handcuffed young man whose face was bruised and bleeding. The DA's voice was a venomous hiss. "You think anyone's going to believe you, Jamal? You'll take the plea tomorrow, or I'll bury you so deep no one will even remember your name." Jamal's voice was desperate breaking. "I didn't do it. There's security footage." Gordon Reed's laugh was low, chilling. "What footage conveniently missing? It's your word against mine. And in this town, we both know who wins that fight." Before Jamal could reply, Reed's hand shot out, striking him across the face. Blood spattered the floor, pooling against the marble as Jamal crumpled under the blow. A sharp gasp escaped Ellie's lips, a sound so soft it might have been mistaken for the whisper of a breeze. But Reed's head snapped around his eyes, narrowing to slits as they locked onto the crack in the door. He shoved Jamal back into the chair, stalking toward the threshold with slow, predatory steps. Ellie tried to turn to run, but her small legs betrayed her. The door swung open, and Reed's hand closed around her thin arm with bruising force. His breath reeked of bourbon and menace. "What did you see, little girl?" He growled, his voice low and dangerous. Ellie's voice caught in her throat. Nothing," she whimpered, her rabbit falling to the floor. "I want my grandma." Reed's grip tightened, his face inches from hers. "If you tell anyone what you saw tonight, bad things will happen to your grandma. You understand me, bad things." He released her with a shove, sending her sprawling onto the polished floor. Ellie scrambled to her feet. Her knees skinned and fled back to the closet, her sobs muffled against the mops and the scent of bleach. When Clara returned an hour later, she found her granddaughter curled in a corner, unresponsive. Ellie's small frame was rigid, her lips sealed in silence. From that night on, she stopped speaking. In the days that followed, Clara noticed changes. Ellie recoiled from the sight of men in suits, shrank away from raised voices, woke screaming from nightmares she couldn't explain. Doctors called it trauma-recommended therapy. But Clara knew it was more than that. It was fear burrowed deep into the child's bones. Clara pressed her forehead against the window of the clinic one evening, her breath fogging the glass as she watched Ellie sit unmoving in the sterile room. She felt the weight of hopelessness pressing down on her chest. How could she protect a child against the powerful, against men like Gordon Reed? But what Clara didn't know, what Gordon Reed couldn't have anticipated, was that the silence he had forced on a terrified child was about to become the loudest sound Savannah had ever heard. The days after that fateful night in the courthouse passed in a haze for Clara Thompson. The world outside her small duplex in Savannah continued as if nothing had happened, but inside silence had settled like a heavy fog. Ellie wouldn't speak. Not to her grandmother, not to her teachers at the preschool, not even to the stuffed rabbit she once whispered her secrets to. Clara felt helpless watching her granddaughter retreat into herself. Every night, Ellie's small body curled tighter beneath the quilt, her eyes wide open in the dark, waiting for the monsters she could no longer name but could never forget. And every morning, Clara's heart broke anew as her bright, chatty little girl refused to utter a sound. The silence was more than absence. It was a void filled with terror and shame, with the invisible weight of secrets too heavy for a child to bear. Clara reached out to doctors, to counselors, to anyone who might explain how her granddaughter had changed overnight. But each appointment felt like an exercise in futility. The clinical terms, selective mutism, post-traumatic stress, failing to capture the rawness of what they were living through. It was during one of these endless, desperate searches for help that Clara met Dr. Rachel Henderson, a soft-spoken child psychologist who had recently moved to Savannah from New Orleans. Rachel had started a therapy program for children using support animals to create a bridge between trauma and healing. Clara, though skeptical, was willing to try anything. The first session was cautious, the bright therapy room filled with soft cushions and a gentle golden retriever named Jasper. Ellie sat on the floor, her arms wrapped around her knees, eyes darting to the corners of the room. Jasper, sensing the fragility of the moment, approached her quietly, nuzzling her hand with his nose. At first, Ellie flinched, but when Jasper gently placed his head on her knee, she relaxed just slightly, her tiny fingers tentatively tangling in his fur. "Jasper's here to keep you safe," Rachel said softly, kneeling beside her. "Nothing bad can happen when he's around." The second session, then the third, brought glimmers of hope. Ellie still refused to speak, but she began to draw. Scribbles at first jagged lines of red and black, but gradually the drawings took shape. A man in a suit towering over a smaller figure, with hands bound. A splash of red at the mouth, a little girl watching from the shadows. Clara's breath caught as she recognized the scene. Rachel leaned closer. "Can you tell me who this is, Ellie?" she asked gently. Ellie's hand trembled as she pointed to the tall figure in the drawing, then whispered, her voice cracking, "Bad man." It was the first time Clara had heard her speak in weeks. The single phrase sent a ripple through the room, filling it with the weight of everything left unsaid. Rachel exchanged a glance with Clara. "This is important," she said. "Ellie's starting to tell her story in her own way." Rachel contacted an old colleague, Martin Perez, a civil rights attorney, who had relocated to Georgia after years of high-profile cases in Chicago. When he heard about Ellie's case, he knew this wasn't just a family tragedy. It was a crack in the foundation of a system that had protected powerful men like Gordon Reed for far too long. Martin visited Clara's home one evening, his briefcase heavy with legal forms, and his voice calm but urgent. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, "I believe your granddaughter witnessed something terrible, something that people in power will do anything to keep quiet. But if we act carefully, we can protect her and make sure her voice is heard." Clara felt her hands tremble as she signed the papers that would allow Martin to pursue legal action. But it wasn't until Ellie tugged at her sleeve, her voice a faint whisper, "Grandma, I don't want the bad man to hurt anyone else," that Clara's resolve solidified into steel. The legal wheels turned slowly, but the first tremors of truth began to ripple outward. Martin filed motions to access courthouse security footage, though every request was stonewalled by technicalities and missing records. He knew this wasn't incompetence, it was a calculated cover-up. Undeterred, he reached out to local journalists, including Dana Rivera, a relentless reporter for the Savannah Gazette who had long suspected corruption in the county's justice system. When Dana saw the red crayon drawings Ellie had made, her hands trembled. "I've covered cases where evidence was buried, but this," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion, "this is a child's truth, staring us in the face. We have to get this story out." The first article Dana published was cautious hinting at the existence of a witness to misconduct without naming Ellie. The response was immediate. Some dismissed it as rumor mongering, but others, neighbors who had long felt the sting of injustice, whispered their own stories. Hushed conversations in church pews, murmurs at bus stops and barber shops. A community long silenced by fear and resignation was beginning to stir. In their modest kitchen, Clara sat with Martin and Dana, her hands clasped around a chipped mug of tea. "They'll come after us," she said, her voice low. "They'll try to silence us like they always have." Martin's jaw tightened. We'll be ready. They've hidden behind power for too long. But if we stand together, they can't silence all of us. And Ellie, sitting cross-legged on the floor, with Jasper's head resting in her lap, looked up and whispered, I'll tell the truth. It was the softest sound in the room, but it echoed like a shout against the silence that had held Savannah captive for generations. The whispers of truth were beginning to rise, fragile but persistent, like the first rays of dawn breaking over the horizon. What began as a child's quiet drawings in a therapy room was unfolding into a story that no amount of power or intimidation could keep hidden. And though the path ahead was fraught with danger, Clara knew one thing with certainty: Ellie's voice, once broken, would now be heard. And it would startle a city and perhaps change it forever. In the quiet hours before dawn, Martin Perez sat at his cluttered desk in the cramped back room of his law office, his mind racing as he sifted through documents. The faint hum of the city outside, the distant wail of a siren, the early footsteps of delivery drivers barely registered. His focus was entirely on the puzzle pieces in front of him: affidavits, witness statements, scribbled notes, and the fragile crayon drawings Ellie Thompson had made. Every line of red and black told a story more damning than any sworn testimony. But Martin knew that in a courtroom, especially against someone as insulated as Gordon Reed, they needed more. Concrete evidence. Unshakable proof that would dismantle not only Reed's web of lies, but the system that had propped him up for years. The first lead came from Dana Rivera. Her investigation into courthouse records revealed that the security logs from the night of the incident had been tampered with. A discrepancy in the digital timestamps, overlooked by those too comfortable in their power, pointed to missing video files that might show exactly what Ellie had seen. Dana handed Martin a small flash drive. A source inside the courthouse got me this, she said, her voice trembling with the weight of the risk they were taking. Backup files from the server. They tried to erase them, but someone made a copy. Martin's pulse quickened as he connected the drive to his computer. Grainy but unmistakable, the footage showed Reed's figure entering the secured hallway with a young black man in handcuffs. No one else in sight. No officers. No attorneys. Just the DA and the terrified defendant. The camera angle didn't capture the full confrontation, but the audio, faint distorted, was clear enough to catch snatches of a chilling exchange. Plead guilty, or it gets worse, Reed's voice hissed, laced with malice. Martin leaned back in his chair, the enormity of what they had in their hands settling over him like a heavy shroud. This wasn't just about Ellie or the Thompson family anymore. It was about a system so deeply corroded that even a child's testimony was at risk of being crushed under its weight. Clara sat across from him the next morning, her hands wrapped tightly around a chipped mug of coffee. What happens next? She asked, her voice wavering. Martin looked at her, his expression resolute. We bring this to light, but we'll need more. Witnesses, experts, people willing to stand up and say enough. Ellie, seated on the floor, with Jasper curled protectively against her, listened quietly. When Martin's words faded into the tense stillness, she spoke softly, her voice gaining strength. I'll tell them everything. Word spread quietly through the community. Small whispered conversations turned into cautious offers of help. Retired courthouse employees reached out anonymously, sharing stories of intimidation and cover-ups. A former deputy, weary from years of guilt, provided a statement detailing how Reed had manipulated evidence and silenced dissent. Rachel Henderson, armed with her years of experience in trauma therapy, prepared Ellie for the possibility of testifying in court. Using dolls and mock setups, she recreated the courtroom environment, helping Ellie understand where she would sit, who would ask questions, and how to stay calm with Jasper at her side. "Remember, sweetie," Rachel murmured during one session, as Ellie nestled against Jasper's comforting weight, "you're not alone. Jasper will be with you, and I'll be right there too. Just tell the truth. That's all you need to do." Ellie nodded, her small voice firm, despite the shadows of fear lingering in her wide eyes. "The bad man hurt the boy, and he told me not to tell, but I'll tell." Meanwhile, Martin gathered his legal team, a small but fiercely dedicated group of young attorneys and seasoned advocates who shared a commitment to justice. They combed through every case Reed had prosecuted, identifying patterns of discrimination, coercion, and abuse. Statistical analyses revealed a glaring disparity. Black defendants in Savannah faced significantly harsher charges and sentences under Reed's office than their white counterparts. Dana's articles grew bolder, each one peeling back another layer of corruption. Headlines questioned not just Reed's actions, but the systemic failures that had allowed his reign of injustice. National news outlets picked up the story, amplifying the voices of those who had long been ignored. The courthouse itself, once a symbol of unassailable power, became a battleground. Protesters gathered outside its steps, holding signs that read, "Justice for all" and "Believe Ellie." Community leaders organized town hall meetings, where residents shared their own encounters with a system designed to silence them. Inside her home, Clara watched these developments with a mix of pride and apprehension. She knew that visibility brought both protection and danger. Their family was already receiving anonymous threats. Phone calls in the dead of night notes slipped under their door. But they also received letters of support from across the country, parents sending messages of solidarity, survivors of injustice sharing their own stories, and children sending hand-drawn pictures of Ellie and Jasper as symbols of courage. One evening, as Martin reviewed new affidavits, a knock sounded at his office door. A nervous young woman stepped inside, her hands trembling. "My name is Angela," she whispered. "I used to work as a clerk in Reed's office. I know things. I was scared before, but after seeing what that little girl is doing, I can't stay silent anymore." Angela's testimony provided a crucial missing piece. She described how case files were altered, how exculpatory evidence disappeared, and how witnesses were intimidated into silence. Her willingness to testify was a turning point, bolstering the case and giving Martin the leverage he needed to push for a formal inquiry into Reed's conduct. The threads of justice, once tangled and obscured, were beginning to weave into a clearer picture. Each statement, each piece of evidence, each voice raised in defiance added weight to the growing movement. What started as a child's quiet drawings was now an undeniable force, a call for accountability that could not be silenced. In the middle of the night, Clara sat by Ellie's bedside, brushing a gentle hand over her granddaughter's curls. "You're so brave, sunshine," she whispered. Ellie stirred her small fingers, tightening around Jasper's fur. "I'm scared," she murmured. "I know," Clara said softly, "but you're not alone, and we're going to make this right." Martin stood at the window of his office, watching the lights of Savannah flicker against the night sky. He knew the path ahead would be treacherous, but the threads of justice were tightening, drawing closer to the moment when truth would no longer be denied. And at the heart of it all was a little girl, with a golden retriever by her side, ready to shatter the silence once and for all. The courthouse doors groaned under the pressure of the crowd, pushing against them, the air inside heavy with anticipation and the sharp edge of tension. Clara Thompson gripped Ellie's hand tightly, the little girl's slender fingers almost disappearing within her grandmother's. Jasper trotted at Ellie's side, his head brushing her leg, ever the loyal guardian. Reporters shouted questions, cameras flashed, and murmurs filled the air as the family stepped into the marbled hallway, their presence a quiet act of defiance against the machinery of power that loomed around them. Inside the courtroom, Judge Miriam Klein presided with a steely calm that belied the storm brewing outside. Her reputation for fairness and integrity had made her a rare beacon of hope in Savannah's beleaguered justice system. Today, her gavel would command not just order, but the weight of truth long suppressed. The gallery was packed civil rights leaders, journalists, ordinary citizens who had taken the day off work just to witness what many believed could be a defining moment in their community's history. Gordon Reed sat at the defense table, his posture rigid, his expensive suit impeccable. Yet his usual confidence had eroded, leaving behind a brittle facade, barely holding back a tide of desperation. His attorney, Calvin Brooks, leaned in, occasionally whispering strategies, but even his seasoned legal mind seemed strained by the gravity of the evidence mounting against them. Martin Perez stood his back straight, his voice steady as he addressed the court. Your Honor, we're here not merely to address one act of misconduct, but to expose a pattern of intimidation abuse and systemic injustice perpetuated by Mr. Reed over many years. Our witnesses, our evidence, and the courage of a child will reveal a truth that can no longer be hidden. Judge Klein nodded gravely. Proceed. Martin called his first witnesses, each one a carefully chosen thread in the tapestry he had spent months weaving. Retired Deputy Ron Ellis, his voice thick with regret, recounted how Reed had pressured him to falsify reports and silence dissent. Angela Ward, the former clerk, provided damning testimony of case files doctored to erase exculpatory evidence, her trembling voice growing stronger with each detail. The weight of their words pressed down on the courtroom like an approaching storm. But it was Ellie's testimony that silenced even the most jaded observers. She entered, holding Jasper's leash, her yellow dress a soft contrast to the somber colors of the room. Her braids were tied with matching ribbons, her expression a mix of fear and resolve. Rachel Henderson accompanied her to the stand, kneeling to her level. Remember, Ellie, just the truth. Jasper is right here with you. Judge Klein's voice softened as she addressed the child. Ellie, do you promise to tell the truth about what you saw? Ellie nodded, her voice barely a whisper. Yes. Martin approached, carefully, his tone gentle. Ellie, can you tell us what you saw in the courthouse that night? Ellie's small voice, steadied by Jasper's presence, carried through the silent courtroom. The bad man was yelling at a boy. The boy had handcuffs. He said he'd make him lie. He hit him. Then he saw me. He hurt my arm. He said if I told, he'd hurt Grandma. A collective intake of breath swept through the room. Gordon Reed's face reddened, his jaw tightening as he exchanged a glance with his attorney. Calvin Brooks rose immediately, his voice sharp. Objection, Your Honor. The child is too young to understand these proceedings. Her statements are unreliable. Judge Klein's gavel rapped sharply. Overruled. The witness will continue. Victoria Adams, the court-appointed child advocate, stepped forward. Your Honor, Ellie has undergone extensive therapy to process the trauma of that night. Her testimony is consistent, her recall precise, and her courage remarkable. We respectfully request the court recognize her statements as credible. Martin presented the recovered security footage next the grainy video played on a large screen. The jury leaned forward, watching the damning images unfold. Reed entering the hallway with the defendant, the muffled audio of threats, and the sound of a slap echoing in the tense silence. Even Reed's attorney seemed to flinch at the clarity of the evidence. The final blow came when Marcus Taylor, the young man whose life Reed had nearly destroyed, was called to the stand. His voice trembled but held steady as he recounted Reed's threats, the planted evidence, and the coercion that led to his false plea. "I thought no one would believe me," he said, his voice cracking. But she saw it. The little girl saw everything. The storm reached its crescendo when Reed, visibly agitated, stood abruptly. "This is a circus," that child was coached. "They're all lying." Judge Klein's voice cut through the uproar. "Mr. Reed, sit down, or I will have you removed from this courtroom." Reed's outburst only fueled the resolve in the room. Ellie clung to Jasper, her small frame trembling, but her gaze unbroken. Martin approached the bench, his voice low, but carrying the weight of the community's collective will. "Your Honor, this child has shown more integrity than many adults in this room. She has faced threats, intimidation, and fear, yet she stands here today to speak the truth. This case is not just about Mr. Reed's crimes. It's about the resilience of those who refuse to be silenced." The jury sat stone-faced, their expressions a mix of horror and determination. Reporters scribbled furiously, their pens capturing every word for headlines that would soon sweep across the country. Outside, a gathering storm of voices called for justice, their chants echoing through the courthouse corridors. As the day drew to a close, Judge Klein addressed the court. "We will reconvene tomorrow for closing arguments. Until then, this court is adjourned." Clara knelt by Ellie, pulling her into a tight embrace. "You were so brave, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice thick with tears. Jasper nuzzled against them both, his calm presence a silent reminder that even amidst the storm, there was safety to be found. Martin packed his notes, his hands trembling slightly from the day's intensity. As he stepped out into the cool evening air, he glanced back at the courthouse, its imposing silhouette against the darkening sky. Tomorrow, he knew, would be the day when everything changed. The storm had broken, but its true power was yet to be unleashed. The courtroom had long emptied, leaving behind the faint echo of footsteps and the weight of decisions that would ripple through the town for years to come. Clara Thompson lingered by the polished wooden door, her fingers tracing the grain as if memorizing every detail of the space where the tide of injustice had finally begun to turn. Ellie stood quietly beside her, her small hand nestled in Jasper's fur. Though the hushed conversations and surges of emotion from earlier had faded, an invisible thread of resolve remained binding those who had witnessed truth spoken aloud. Outside, the air was cool with the scent of impending rain. The sky, streaked with pale pinks and grays, seemed to mirror the delicate balance of hope and exhaustion in Clara's heart. Ellie tugged gently at her sleeve. "Grandma, is it really over now?" Clara knelt to meet Ellie's gaze, her voice a quiet tremor. "No, sweetheart, not over. But it's a beginning. A beginning where voices like yours will be heard, and people like Gordon Reed won't be able to hurt anyone else." The weight of those words settled over them, not as a burden, but as a testament to the courage that had brought them to this point. Jasper nudged Ellie gently, his golden eyes steady and calm. His presence had been more than comfort. It had been an anchor in the storm, a silent guardian standing watch as the world spun wildly around them. In the days following the verdict, Savannah seemed to breathe a little easier, though the scars of what had transpired were far from healed. Community leaders gathered in town halls to discuss new policies aimed at dismantling the insidious patterns of corruption and racial bias exposed during the trial. Churches hosted open forums where members could share their stories of resilience and resistance. Schools implemented programs to teach children about justice, fairness, and the power of truth, using Ellie's bravery as a real-life example. Clara found herself at the center of this movement, not by choice, but by necessity. She spoke at gatherings, her words quiet yet piercing. "This isn't just about my granddaughter," she would say. "It's about every child who's been silenced, every person afraid to stand up because they thought they were alone." Ellie reminded us that courage doesn't wait for permission. Ellie herself, once shy and hesitant, began to blossom in ways Clara had never dared imagine. With Jasper at her side, she returned to school, where her classmates greeted her, not with awkwardness or whispers, but with admiration. Teachers incorporated lessons about speaking up for what's right into their curricula, inspired by her story. One day after school, Ellie came home, clutching a handmade card from her class filled with drawings of her and Jasper standing proudly in front of a bright sun. The words read, "Thank you for being our hero." Meanwhile, Martin Perez and Rachel Henderson worked tirelessly to establish a legal advocacy center dedicated to cases like Ellie's cases that might otherwise be ignored or buried beneath layers of intimidation and bureaucracy. They named it the Ellie Center for Justice and Healing, a tribute not only to her bravery, but to the idea that healing and justice must walk hand in hand. Rachel's therapy dog program expanded with Jasper's image gracing posters that encouraged children to trust their voices, to know they were not alone. Max, the original therapy dog, continued to visit schools and hospitals, now a symbol of resilience and the profound impact of compassion. These gentle animals were no longer just comforters. They were bridge builders, helping children like Ellie cross from silence into self-expression. One crisp morning, Clara and Ellie visited the new community mural painted along the side of the courthouse. The mural depicted Ellie holding Jasper's leash, her other hand raised, pointing not just at the dog, but at a sunburst of color and light. The words woven into the design read, "Truth is louder than fear." As they stood before the mural, Clara felt a tear trace down her cheek. Not of sadness, but of quiet pride. "You've changed the world, Ellie," she whispered. Ellie, her face illuminated by the rising sun, tilted her head thoughtfully. Maybe she said softly, "But I just wanted to tell the truth." And with those simple words, spoken with the clarity of a child who had endured far more than her years should have allowed, the weight of injustice felt just a little lighter. The journey ahead would be long, and there would always be new challenges to face. But as long as there were voices like Ellie's and companions like Jasper at their side, hope would not be silenced. The world was listening, and this was just the beginning. The story of young Ellie Thompson and her grandmother Clara is more than just a tale of a single courtroom triumph. It's a profound journey of courage, resilience, and the unyielding power of truth. From the moment Ellie, a fragile 3-year-old, pointed her tiny finger at the imposing figure of District Attorney Gordon Reed and spoke the words that would echo through the walls of the courthouse, a seismic shift occurred. The silence that once protected corruption and intimidation was shattered, and in its place arose a chorus of voices, a wave of solidarity that transcended fear. This wasn't just about a courtroom verdict or the downfall of a powerful man. It was about exposing the hidden mechanisms of oppression that had stifled countless voices like Ellie's. It was about Clara's unwavering love and determination to protect her granddaughter even when the odds were insurmountable. It was about Martin Perez and Rachel Henderson channeling their legal expertise and therapeutic compassion to ensure justice wasn't a fleeting moment, but a lasting impact. And it was about a community rediscovering its collective strength, finding the courage to confront uncomfortable truths and demand accountability. Ellie's story reminds us that the smallest voice can break the loudest silence, that innocence paired with truth holds a power even the mightiest cannot withstand. The presence of Jasper, the therapy dog, who stood as a beacon of comfort and courage, symbolizes the importance of empathy and support systems in helping victims of trauma reclaim their agency. His silent companionship speaks volumes about the strength found in quiet resilience. The lesson we draw from this story is clear courage is not reserved for the powerful or the loud. It resides in each of us, waiting for the moment when we choose to stand for what is right. Speaking truth to power, as Ellie did, requires not just bravery, but also the support of a community willing to listen, believe, and act. The systems that allow injustice to thrive depend on silence and complicity. But as Ellie showed us, when one voice speaks out, it gives permission for others to join in creating a ripple effect that can dismantle even the most entrenched injustices. In our daily lives, this story encourages us to reflect: what injustices around us have we chosen to ignore? Are there voices, perhaps quieter or marginalized, that need us to amplify them? Whether it's advocating for fairness in the workplace, standing up against bullying in our communities, or simply choosing kindness and understanding over indifference, we all have the power to contribute to a culture of justice and compassion. If this story moved you, if Ellie's courage touched your heart and inspired you to believe in the transformative power of truth and solidarity, please consider subscribing to this channel. Your support allows us to continue bringing you stories of resilience and hope, stories that inspire action and remind us all that change begins with a single courageous voice. Join our community today, and let's keep the conversation going, because together we can create a world where truth is louder than fear and justice is a reality for everyone.